Frank's first professional audition lasted exactly 4 minutes before they stopped him and said, "That's enough." But what happened in the parking lot afterward created a legend. It was the 18th of September, 1939, and 3-year-old Frank Sinatra was sitting in a borrowed Chevy in the parking lot of Columbia Records in New York City. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the steering wheel. He'd been sitting there for 45 minutes, trying to build up the courage to walk through that door. Frank had been dreaming about this moment for years. Columbia Records was where the magic happened, where Bing Crosby had made it, where real singers became stars. Frank had grown up in Hoboken, New Jersey, the only child of Italian immigrants. His father, Marty, thought singing was a waste of time, but his mama, Dolly, believed in her son's voice. Dolly had scraped together money to buy Frank a PA system. She'd used her connections to get him gigs. She'd gotten him on Major Bow's Amateur Hour in 1935, where he and the Hoboken Four had won first prize. But winning amateur shows and getting a real recording contract were two different things. Frank had been singing at the Rustic Cabin Roadhouse for almost a year, 75 cents a night plus tips. He'd been rejected by RCA, rejected by Decca, rejected by Brunswick. Each time, too different, too soft, not commercial enough. The Columbia audition was his last real shot. Finally, at 2:47 p.m., Frank forced himself out of the car. He'd borrowed his cousin's good suit. His mama had pressed his shirt so many times the collar could cut glass. His hair was slicked back with enough pomade to waterproof a boat. Inside Columbia Records, a receptionist named Helen was manning the front desk. She handled most of the walk-in auditions. Frank walked in and immediately felt out of place. The walls were covered with photos of real singers, people who'd made records, people who mattered. "Can I help you?" Helen asked. Frank cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to audition." "What kind of music do you sing?" "Ballads, mostly, ma'am. Love songs, standards." "Who do you sound like?" Frank hesitated. "I don't sound like nobody, ma'am. I just sound like me." Helen studied him. Something about his intensity caught her attention. "Mr. Cap is in the studio right now, but I can have you do a test recording." Frank's heart jumped. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Helen led him down a narrow hallway to a small recording room. A piano player was already there. "What are you going to sing?" Helen asked. "Night and Day," Frank said. "Cole Porter." "All right. When you're ready." The piano player started the intro, and Frank began to sing. His voice came out shaky at first, nervous and unsure, but then something happened. He closed his eyes and forgot about the recording equipment. His voice found its groove. That unique sound, lighter than the big band singers, more intimate, with a vulnerability that didn't quite sound like anyone else. Helen's eyebrows raised. This kid didn't sound like Bing Crosby. He sounded like something different. Frank made it through the first verse when the door suddenly opened. Jack Cap walked in, looking annoyed. "Just doing a test recording," Helen said. "Frank Sinatra, sir," Frank said, his heart sinking. Jack crossed his arms and stared at Frank. "Play me something else. Something up-tempo." Frank's hands were shaking. He looked at the piano player. All or nothing at all. He sang it with every ounce of energy he had, pouring his whole soul into those 4 minutes. But exactly 4 minutes in, Jack held up his hand. "That's enough." Frank stopped mid-verse, his heart plummeting. "That's enough." The words every auditioner dreads. Jack looked at Helen, then back at Frank. "Son, what are you trying to do here? What kind of music are you trying to make? Because what I just heard was—" Jack paused. "It's weak. You're singing like you're talking to one person in a bedroom, not performing for a crowd." Frank felt his face burning. "I just sing what I feel, sir." "Well, what you feel isn't commercially viable," Jack said bluntly. "This is the big band era. People want power, volume, excitement. What you're doing is too quiet, too intimate. Nobody's going to pay money to hear a guy whisper love songs into a microphone." Helen started to speak up, but Jack was on a roll. "And that vibrato, it's too much. You sound nervous, uncertain. People want confidence from a singer. Frank stood there, feeling every word like a punch to the gut. My advice, Jack continued, stick to local clubs. You've got a nice little style for roadhouses and wedding gigs, but you'll never make it on records. You're too soft, too Italian-sounding, too different. The market won't support it. Yes, sir, Frank whispered. Thank you for your time. Frank walked out of that recording room, through the front office, and out to the borrowed car. He made it about 30 feet into the parking lot before the tears started. He sat in that Chevy, crying so hard he could barely breathe. Everything Jack Cap had said echoed in his head. Too soft, too weak, too different. Stick to local clubs. Frank cried in that parking lot for nearly 2 hours. He watched the sun start to set, watched his dreams crumble into dust. Then something shifted. Frank wiped his eyes and looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked like hell. But underneath all that, he saw something else. He saw his mama's face when she'd bought him that first microphone. He saw Nancy's face when she'd told him to chase this dream. He saw every person who'd ever believed in him. And Frank got angry. Jack Cap had said he was too different. Well, maybe being different was exactly what the world needed. Frank started the car and drove straight home to Hoboken. He found his mama in the kitchen, and she took one look at his face and knew something had happened. Francis, what's wrong? I auditioned at Columbia Records today, Frank said. Jack Cap told me to stick to local clubs, said my voice was too soft, too intimate, said I'd never make it on records. Dolly pulled her son into a fierce hug. That man don't know everything. Mama, he's Jack Cap. He knows the music business. Francis Albert Sinatra, you listen to me. Dolly grabbed his face in her hands. That man told you that you don't fit into the boxes he knows. That's his limitation, not yours. You're not supposed to fit into their boxes. You're supposed to build your own. Frank pulled away, frustrated. Mama, you don't understand. I sing too soft for the big band era. I don't sound like anybody else. And that's not a good thing in the music business. That's exactly why it's a good thing, Dolly insisted. Francis, there are a million singers who sound like everybody else. The world don't need another Bing Crosby. The world needs someone who sounds like nobody else. The world needs you. Listen to me, Dolly continued. You know why that man told you to stick to local clubs? Because he's scared. He's scared of something new. And when people are scared, they try to make you small, so they feel big. She grabbed his hands. I didn't raise you to fit into somebody else's idea of what a singer should be. I raised you to be Francis Albert Sinatra. You remember when you were 8 and the other kids made fun of the way you talked? Frank nodded. And what did you do? I kept talking the same way. Damn right you did. You're not going to change now just because some record man don't understand what you got. She stood up and started making coffee. Here's what you're going to do. Tomorrow, you're going back to the rustic cabin. You're going to sing like you always sing. And you're going to keep singing until somebody with ears in their head recognizes what you got. And if nobody does? Dolly turned and looked at him with those fierce eyes. Then you make them listen. You don't wait for permission to be great, Francis. You just be great. And eventually, they got no choice but to notice. That night, Frank made a decision. He took his last dollar and bought a small notebook. On the first page, he wrote down exactly what Jack Cap had said. Too soft, too intimate, too different. Stick to local clubs. Then underneath those words, Frank wrote his own response. I'll show you what different can do. Over the next few months, Frank didn't give up. He kept singing at the rustic cabin. He kept practicing. He kept developing that unique, intimate style that Jack Cap had dismissed as commercially unviable. And then, in June 1939, something happened. Harry James, the famous trumpet player starting his own big band, came to the rustic cabin looking for a male vocalist. He'd heard about this skinny kid from Hoboken with an unusual voice. Harry listened to Frank sing one song, All or Nothing at All, and offered him a contract on the spot, $75 a week. You've got something different, kid, Harry said. And different is exactly what I'm looking for." The Harry James Orchestra recording of All or Nothing at All was released in August 1939. It didn't sell much at first, but Frank's intimate, conversational style started getting noticed. In January 1940, Tommy Dorsey, one of the biggest band leaders in America, heard Frank sing and offered him a job, $125 a week. Within a year, Frank Sinatra was the most popular vocalist in America. By 1943, he was causing riots at the Paramount Theater, girls screaming, fainting, throwing themselves at the stage. The intimate style that Jack Kapp had called too soft became Frank's signature. While other singers bellowed at their audiences, Frank sang to them, making every person feel like he was singing directly to them. The vibrato that Jack had called too nervous became the emotional vulnerability that made Bobby Soxers cry. Everything Jack Kapp had said was wrong became the exact reason Frank was right. By 1945, Frank Sinatra was the most famous entertainer in America. He'd made over 200 recordings. He'd starred in movies. He'd sold out Carnegie Hall. And Columbia Records? They came calling in 1943, offering Frank a solo contract. The same company that had rejected him 4 years earlier now wanted to make him the centerpiece of their catalog. The contract was worth $250,000 over 5 years. During the contract negotiations, Jack Kapp, who'd moved to Decca but was consulting on the deal, pulled Frank aside. "You know what's funny?" Jack said. "I almost let you slip away. When you came in for that audition back in 1939, I told you to stick to local clubs. You remember that?" Frank pulled out his wallet and showed Jack the small notebook he still carried. On the first page were Jack's words about being too soft, followed by Frank's response about proving him wrong. "I remember, Mr. Kapp. I remember every word you said." Jack looked at that notebook and shook his head. "Frank, I was wrong. Dead wrong. You weren't too soft. I was too deaf to hear what you were doing. That intimate style singing like you're talking to one person, that's what people wanted all along. I just couldn't see it." "It's okay, Mr. Kapp," Frank said. "You taught me something important that day." "What's that?" "That when someone tells you you're too different to succeed, they're really telling you they're too limited to understand. And that's not your problem. It's theirs." Frank kept that notebook for the rest of his life. He'd pull it out whenever he felt discouraged. Years later, when Frank's career hit rock bottom in the early 1950 seconds, when his voice failed, when Columbia dropped him, when Ava Gardner left him, he'd look at that notebook and remember the 18th of September, 1939. He'd remember sitting in that parking lot, crying, believing his career was over before it started. And he'd remember his mama's words, "You don't wait for permission to be great. You just be great." That's what got him through. That's what made him fight for the role in From Here to Eternity. That's what made him come back stronger than ever. The rejection became his fuel. Every no became a reason to work harder. And that notebook, that small record of the day someone told him he wasn't good enough, became the most valuable thing he owned. That reminder that rejection isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. Jack Kapp's rejection in September 1939 could have ended Frank's career before it started. Instead, it became the fuel that drove him to prove everyone wrong. The man who told Frank he was too soft to make records ended up watching him become the most successful singer in history. But only after Frank refused to believe that being different was a weakness. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is having someone tell us we'll never make it. Because that's when we find out what we're really made of. Frank was told to stick to local clubs. Instead, he sang his way past every person who doubted him and changed music history forever.